Hello everyone, it's Mike Levin, SEO, out walking my dog Cecil. If he will walk, he wants to go a different direction. Okay, we'll entertain him. And it's Tuesday, December 16th, 2014, and tonight will be the first night of Hanukkah. And this will be a very strange and technical video. I'm changing the startup procedure of Linux, and this requires me editing one of the 3 QCal virtual hard drives that I include with Linux. There's one for the home directory where your programming code goes, which is what gets preserved when you do a reset by being copied out of the Linux app. And then there's the TCE hard drive, which is where extensions and things like Python and anything that you install get stored. And then there's the opt hard drive, which is where customizations and other startup procedures and config file stuff gets stored. And in there is a file called bootsync.sh, which is essentially your script that gets run at the end of the Linux or Tiny Core Linux boot procedure. And that's where I run the menu, in addition to transferring something called recipe.sh over from the host file, or the host side of things, a file that resides on your Mac or Windows system, into the QEMU virtual machine. It's just a script file, and it gets executed at startup, and it builds a server and does other various things. And because it lives on the host machine after download but before running Linux, some things make that text file follow the rules of the host machine, namely Git. If you do a Git pull of Linux on a Windows machine, it has a tendency by default to insert extra carriage returns. I believe they're carriage returns. So end of lines can be handled in different ways, and they are handled in different ways by different types of computer operating systems. Unix and now finally Mac, that it's based on Unix, handle it one way, which is just putting in a line feed character, or an end of line character. Windows, on the other hand, inserts an extra character, 2 characters, a carriage return and a line feed. And this carriage return is often viewed as caret M or control M. So if you ever load a file in Unix or Linux and it has an M at the end of it, or a caret M, you know you're looking at a file that was moved over from Windows without being converted to the Unix/Mac standard. And the recipe file, that happens to sometimes. Git and GitHub or actually it's really Git, automatically converts it to the Windows standard. And then when you boot Linux, it carries it right over in the Linux, in the Windows standard, and creates errors on starting up, and it'll create a bad experience for some small segment of people kicking the tires. It's not people who download the zip directly either from my site or from GitHub. It's people who do a Git clone from GitHub who are on Windows, and I want it to work correctly even for them. So I figured out a command. I believe there's 2 ways to do it. You can do it with a stream editor, sed. There's an even easier way to do it with a command called tr, which happens to be available. Both of them are available, but tr was easier. That happens to be available in the very, very, very tiny version of the Linux command set that I'm using, which is why Tiny Core Linux is so small, called BusyBox. And there's a whole education here. There are different types of Linuxes. By far the most common is called GNU Linux, which stands for GNU is not Unix. It's one of those self-referential or recursive acronyms, kind of super geeky. Richard Stallman is responsible for that, and it combined with Linus Torvalds' boot kernel to become what we commonly know as GNU Linux, or we commonly know as Linux, but is actually GNU Linux. Tiny Core Linux is not that. It is called a BusyBox Linux, which takes about 150 megabytes worth of commands and turns it into half a megabyte. And that's where, you know, your bare, stripped down, even Ubuntu and Debian and Red Hat Unix installations can't be gotten under about 200 megabytes, whereas Tiny Core Linux, 8 megabytes. After it's beefed out with all the support stuff to get it booted as a virtual machine, you know, 30 megabytes. While it's compressed, still about 20 megabytes. Anyway, I digress. Point being that when I change the startup procedure of Linux, I need to edit a file called bootsync.sh, which is embedded into a virtual hard drive that's not quite so easy to edit. And I'm going to be doing that either today at the office or maybe from my office on Code with Mike Friday, just to, after copying the recipe file over from the host machine, I'm going to spin through it regardless of whether it was fetched from a Windows or Mac desktop, and strip out carriage returns so that it will always run correctly, just to make Linux that much more bulletproof. It's kind of esoteric, but it's an important step because I want as many positive experiences as possible, particularly people jumping on the bandwagon to contribute through GitHub. And I actually will have to boot the system, most likely, unless I mount the QCal drive from the host machine, but most likely I will boot Linux, make my edits to bootsync.sh, delete out any of the other files that I happen to have put there during the build, and then do a little trick with a dd command to wipe everything out to zeros. I essentially copy nil to a file until it fills up, and then I delete that file, and then I use qemu-img, a special command for creating QCal and other virtual drives, to reformat it back to QCal, which has the result of shrinking it, getting it to under 200K. And that is an esoteric little bit of work I need to do in order to make Linux even a little bit more bulletproof for a wider audience. And if you suffered through listening to that, thanks for joining me. Hope to talk to you soon, and don't forget to subscribe.